we're going to look at project 2, the calculator. This is a kind of a fun assignment. I think you're going to like this one. So this is what your final project's going to look like. You're going to have the player, you're going to write to the player, choose a task. Press 1 to add, 2 to subtract, 3 to multiply, or 4 to divide. Then the player puts in a number. And it says, please enter the first number, okay? Then, of course, the player enters the second number to your prompt. Please enter the second number. And then you have the answer is, and the player puts the answer. So that's what you're going to write. So what are we going to do in this video? First thing we're going to do is we're going to declare our variables. We always declare our variables first, right? Then we're going to store floating point numbers and float variables. We've done this before. We're going to print a variable's value on the screen. Okay, then we're going to store input from the user. Then we're going to store an integer and an int variable. We're going to add the powerful if statement. Okay. Then we're going to do some, we're going to learn some general practices about how to indent code. And we're going to learn about some mathematical operators: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So in the beginning, when you sketch out the flow chart for the first part of this, all we're doing is a basic coding program. We're going to ask the user to add a number. Then we ask the user to add a second number. Then we program adding two numbers together, and we print out the results. Now once we add that powerful if statement, you see we have different functions for the add, subtract, multiply, and divide functions. Then we have the same thing. We have the results printed out. So this is what it looks like when you scratch it out in pencil to yourself before you start programming. And the reason I showed you how you divide out that program is because everything is taken a step at a time. Even if it's done in multiple layers, it's really quite simple if you just think of one thing at a time. But it always helps to see it in relation to the big picture. Okay, in lab 1, we do the same thing that we did with our first lab. You set up your console project, include your IOStream library, use the standard namespace, and you insert the main function. Okay, we've used the word console project before. Now we learn exactly what is a console project. It's just a C++ project, opens with a black window, and uses text to communicate with the user. Now there's many different ways to set up a console project, but we're going to set up all our console projects the same way. We're going to include our IOStream library. Remember, in, out, IOStream. We're going to use the standard namespace, and then we're going to use the main function. Okay, so we're going to open our file. We click this file, open. We'll open our project. We're going to go into calculator. We're going to go into calculator vcproj. Okay, now this is what shows up. So what do we do? Well, first thing we do is we put in your note calculator by you. Okay, we're going to add some empty lines of code next. Well, why would you do that? The calculator doesn't, the computer doesn't read any of that. Well, that's the essential point. You put in spaces so that you can read it. It's for you. You know, the computer doesn't really recognize extra lines of code, so it just makes it easier to read. They gave me a couple extra lines here. Put in here. Oops. Include the IOStream library. And I put what? Come over here to my starter code text. And I grab this include, right? Control copy, come back here. Right click, paste. So what am I including? My IOStream library, right? IOStream. So the next thing we're going to do is use the standard namespace. So I come down here. Oops. Use the standard namespace. Then I come back here and I get the code. And I paste it here. So now we're going to insert our main function. We'll put in void main parentheses, then our curly braces, right? So far this looks just like project 1. Do this just like I have it, and you've got your basic calculator all ready to get started. So now we begin lab 2. In this lab you learn about variables. Then you declare 3 variables for your calculator project. So at the end of this lab you're going to add 2 numbers together and print the result. I'm sure you've heard about a variable in math class. Variable 1 plus variable 2 equals something. You've seen it expressed like this perhaps. A plus B is equal to 24. Then you had to solve for A or something like that. So a variable is just it's just something that it's a placeholder. So A represents something, right? You have that in math, you have that in computers as well. It's just a place, but in computers it's a place for the computer to store the information, like a little container. And but sometimes it helps if you to think of it like a math equation, okay? Well, before you can use a variable in your computer, you got to declare it. You got to tell the computer what's going on. You just can't throw in a variable. So the first thing we do before we start to write code is we tell our computer what kind of variables we're going to use. There's different types of variables. There's a float, integer, string. There's many of them, but these are some very common ones. A float is just any kind of number that has a decimal in it. An integer is a whole number, obviously. A string is just words or letters. Okay? So obviously we try and keep our program skinny, so we try to use the smallest variable, the smallest container we can find for that particular object. In this particular computer program, you want to use a float variable so that someone can use a decimal if they want to. So now we're just going to type in here, declare the variables. Click enter. Go in here, get my starter code. Come back, just paste it in there. And what's my variable name? Number 1. Don't erase that semicolon. So now I got 2 more variables to declare. I just click enter. I'm going to paste it again. Then I click enter and I paste it again. So what's this variable name? Number 2. And what's this variable name here? Float. Result. Okay, variables can have values. Alright, if you're playing a computer game and you have dogs in a room, the variable is dogs and the value would be 3 if you had 3 dogs in the room. So a variable can have values. So it's just the information that, so the value is the information that's contained in the container. So you could declare it by anything you want. So we're going to put a temporary value in so that we can do some computing on this before we have the user enter the code to make sure our code works. Like I said before, a float is a type of a variable. A float is a number. It's any type of a number with a decimal. Okay? It can store negative numbers, positive numbers, and any kind of decimals in there. So floats store numbers that users can type into your calculator program. So just to hold our place here while we're calculating our numbers here, I'm going to give any kind of number to this one. I'll put it at number 1 equals 5. Make sure you put spaces in there so that the computer knows that's an operator. Whoops. And we're just doing this for a reason of calculation, that's all. You have a temporary value to make sure your program's working before you go to the next step and add user donated values, okay? So in this example, if I give the number 1 the value of 7, and I say that value 2 is a value of number 7, what kind of a value would number 2 be? You got it. You need to learn how to read this, see? So I give my result value 2. The result is equal to number underscore 1 plus number underscore 2. Now the last thing we're going to do for this particular lab is we're going to use our cout variable, a cout. So we're going to print out something, right? Cout command to print out the variable values. So we're going to print the results. See, we're going to go cout result end line. So we're going to see what that result is. See if our program's working. So what I do here, we click enter. Oops. Print the results. We'll come back to the code. There's our cout command. And what are we printing out? We're printing out what variable? Result, right? So the next thing I do before I go and run my program, I compare what I've written to what's in the instructions. And once I compare and I'm satisfied, then I debug my program. I click the debug. I click start debugging. Okay, and I wait for the results to come. So if you get an error code, what do? The dialog box will tell you you have build errors. Click no so that you can start finding and fixing your bugs. So double check your example with this example here in the class. Scroll to see all the code. Make sure everything has a semicolon at the end of it. And the second time, if you run it through, there aren't any bugs in your program. You'll see a little black window appear for a second. Then you're done. So what are we doing in Lab 3? We're going to use our cout command again and our cin command. We're going to introduce a cin command this time. And we're going to get input from the user so that the user puts in the code, and then instead of having the numbers automatically there, we'll have a variable number, a true variable. So then we'll have a true addition program at the end of this lab. Okay, one of the things that you have to be cautious of in programming, especially with C++, is that commands end with a semicolon. Most codes, most lines of codes do have that, and you've already used it a lot, but there are some exceptions there. So the ones we haven't had so far is the include command when we added the library, and the main function command. So there are many places where it's easy to delete a semicolon by accident. So that's one of the first places that you should check if your code isn't working. And always double check when you're finished writing a line to make sure that you're not erasing a semicolon. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove all those spurious numbers we just put in there. So I'm going to take out the equals 5. Take out the equals 3. Well, actually, I have to take out the whole thing. Take out everything up to the 2. Just remember, don't take away that semicolon. So I have no equals in there anymore. I just declared my number 1, declared number 2, and declared my result. Now, you've noticed in your cout, your cout commands, that they're all ending with your look there, eyes, right? And the end line command. The end line command just tells the computer to go to, it just tells it to move down a line. That's all it does. So you're going to have end lines at the end of the cout commands when you're using your Hello World program, right? And if you don't end your lines with end line, then all of your text ends up in one line. So we're going to use the end line command to end line so your text is easier to read. Now what we're going to do is just make us a bunch of spaces. Come up here, and we're going to get numbers. Okay, so I'm going to come over here into my starter code text. I do my cout. This will appear on the screen. Come back to my C++. Do it a couple times. Then I'm going to put my next information. Okay. Print out here. Click. I go get the code. I paste it again. So this get numbers. I'm going to put in here. Enter a number. And I can't put in here. Make sure you're not taking away those quotation marks. If it ain't red, it's dead. Enter another number. And we'll print for the last one. The answer is so I gotta make some spaces so I can put something in between, right? Once again, the spaces are for you. So we were doing output statements, cout. Now we're going to put an input statements, cin. You got in and out, input, output. So now the user is going to put something into the computer, right? This is where it gets powerful. Okay, just remember that the cout, the output, is 2 less than symbols, and the input are 2 greater than symbols. That's what you need for either one of those. Okay. In the cout, the information goes out to the screen. The cin, the information gets stored in the variable, or you can say the user puts it in the computer. So now I'm going to put in my cin commands. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to go to my starter code. I get my cin, right click, copy, Come back to the calculator and right-click paste. And same with after here. Let me, that bugs me. Okay. All right, so what are you going to be declaring? What's the first number? That's going to be number 1, right? So what's this one going to be? Number 2. So now we look at calculated variable values. Given float 1 is equal to 5. And the float result is equal to number 1 plus 2, the number 1 plus the integer 2. Okay, so we're going to calculate this example. So the result, this container for result, is going to contain this calculation, the number 1 plus 2, right? So whatever number it is, you add 2 to it. So if you have the float number here 4, and you have float 2 number is equal to 5, and the float result is equal to numbers 1 plus 2, what's going to be the answer? Of course, 4 plus 5 is 9, right? So now we're going to calculate the result. Okay, result equals number 1 plus number 2. Then what we have? Semicolon. You're right. Now save my work. Run the debugger. Okay, now ask for a number. We enter another number and add it up. So what do I do if there's mistakes? I check my code against the example. Make sure I've got it all right. Make sure that I have semicolons at the end of my calculations. Make sure that I'm not missing any parentheses, like here in the main. Make sure that I don't have anything inside of those curly braces, out on the other side of the curly brace, out of the main function, because it won't print, it won't work. So now we're in lab 4. So now we're learning about the powerful if statement. Trust me, this is one of the most powerful statements in computing. You're really going to love what you can do with the if statement. It's going to make your programs really flexible and variable. Okay, we're going to let the user choose between addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Now we're going to learn about the integer variable int. Integers are whole numbers. There's no decimals involved. Well, why would you bother making the distinction between a float and an integer? Because making everything a float really slows down a program, so you want to make your program lean and mean as much as you can. So if you're not going to be using fractions, why would you include them? That's why we're going to use the integer variable. So now, to use the if statement, I need to declare me another variable. So I'm going to go back to my starter code text. And I'm going to copy this code in variable name equals some number. So I'm going to copy, come back to my calculator, And after the last float results, I'm going to add a new variable. I'm just going to paste it in there. Now what's this variable name? This variable name is going to be which calculation? And some number is going to be 1. Okay? Now we're going to look at the if function. Now you notice that there, instead of like the main function having an empty pair of parentheses, you have the condition inside the parentheses of your if function. Okay? So the condition here is the value of whatever which calculation is. See that which calculation in this example? In this thing we're going to put which calculation, and we're going to identify it with 1. So then if that is true, whatever's inside the curly brackets of the if condition is going to be run. Okay? So we're going to do 1 will be add, 2 will be subtract, 3 will be multiply, 4 will be divide. But right now we're only interested in addition because we want to make sure our program runs, right? So we're just going to do one thing at a time. That's the secret to programming. You do a piece at a time, make sure it works before you add the second piece. Don't be in a hurry like Miss Hadley. So now I'm going to go grab me the next thing off the starter code text. Now notice I want to include everything up to the last curly brace. Don't forget to copy that last curly brace. Right click copy. Come back to the calculator. Now where do I go? Where am I going to put this? Okay, make sure that you're just above the line calculate the results. Let's go down. Where's calculate the results? Right here, right? So I'm going to put it right here. Paste it. All right, so now what am I going to do? I'm going to make sure that this Control X, Control V comes right after to calculate the results. Okay, make sure you move that last curly brace after the calculation so it's all inside the if command. One big key in C++ programming is that you got to watch those curly brackets. You make sure that they're where they're supposed to be. You got to make sure that for every opening one that there's a closing one. That's why when you first put them in there, always put ending one. Even if you've got it misplaced, you'll always have the same number of curly brackets. But you got to make sure that they are around the things they're supposed to be. So one way we keep track of brackets is we'd use indentation, a little cheater secret. So this is how that works. See how the if command lines up here? Everything under the if command is just tabbed in a space. So you can see where you are. This is all about helping you. All right? Indenting your code keeps it all straight for you. Just use the tab key. So now we'll just clean up our code a little bit. We'll come on down and we'll just tab. Well, what does the double equal sign means? It means to compare what's on the right with what's on the left. When you make an if command, if is looking at which calculation is equal to 1. So you're comparing both sides, what's on the right with what's on the left. If this is true, then you run the statements underneath it. The single equal sign stores a value. The double equal sign just compares them. In the if statements, we're just going to check to see if it's addition, multiplication, division, or a subtraction, and we're just going to use 1, 2, 3, or 4 to indicate which one it's going to be. So now what do? I just changed this thing here. See? We're going to call this which calculation. It's not going to run if you misspell it, Hadley. So now I'm ready to debug this. First I click Save. Now I run my debugger. Okay. Number. And it runs. Now what if it didn't run? What do? You make sure that your code looks like the example, right? Make sure you've got your closing bracket in the right place. Remember your, pull it up. Your closing bracket comes after the calculation. If you forgot to drag it, make sure you dragged it, okay? So now we're going to complete, we're going to do the following things to change our programs so the user decides which calculation the computer does. So the first thing I got to do is I have to fix that integer variable I put in there. I take all that out. I click take out the equals 1. See that? Delete it. So I go back to the starter code. I'm going to look for cout. This will appear on the screen. Oh, up here. Here it is. Right click, copy. Come back here. I'm going to come over here underneath my variables, and I'm going to give my comment, give instructions. That's always nice. Now I'm going to put my cout command here, my cout command. So this will appear on the screen. So I'm going to put it to tell the user, choose a task. We'll just type it in here. Press 1 to add. 2 to subtract. 3 to multiply. And 4 to divide. Okay, if it isn't red, it's dead. That means you have forgotten your quotation marks. Next, I'm going to go copy my C in code. Come back to my calculator. Come to the beginning of this next line and paste it in. And what are we going to call this? Which calculation, right? Be sure you're spelling this right. Don't delete the semicolon. So when I'm done with that, I debug this again. Make sure I have no bugs. So I put in 1 this time because I don't have anything else except for 1. So I put in my numbers, and it works. Now if it didn't work, I just check my example with this example here. Okay? And make sure that you follow the steps right. And now we begin the last lab. Aww. So we're going to learn about the operators, and we're going to use them in the code. So the user can choose what calculation they want to do, and your code will perform perfectly, just like you. So now we're going to get the copy and paste this if statement a few more times so we get the We have it for the addition. Now we're going to do it from the subtraction, multiplication, and division. So I come over here. I'm going to start with my if. Here we go. Right click copy. Make a couple spaces, then right click space, right click paste. And a couple spaces and right click paste. And I think it's one more time we need it. Right click paste. Okay, so we got addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So we're set. Next thing we're going to do is use those smooth operators. Okay, you've used addition. So you guys know what subtraction is, right? Subtraction, just that minus sign on your keyboard. Now, the star key is what we use for the multiplication. You don't want to use the X. X is a letter. Use the star for multiplication and the slash for division. Okay, you're going to use these many times. So what does this mean? If you use integer number equals 2, so what is the result of the number 1 star 2? What's that? You got it. 2 times 2 is what? 4. There you go. You're so smart. You always knew you were, though. Oh, if the first calculation is addition, that's 1. The second calculation is what? Subtraction. So 2 is subtraction. So instead of the plus, I put in a minus. The third calculation is multiplication, right? So 3 is multiplication. And I put in the star in here. And lastly, we have division is 4. And we use a slash. You know, I have this superfluous comment in here. I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to delete the rest of them. So now I'm going to finish cleaning these up. I'm going to make my indentations so they're easier for me to read. That's that if statement. That's that if statement. That's that if statement. Now run the code and see if Miss Hadley has any bugs. Click debug. And it worked. Okay, we're almost done here. Come down to the very end. And we're going to type the word system pause. Right before the end, right after print the results, right? So it's a function, right? But this takes an operator, so what do we put in here? Pause. It's not red, it's what? Now what do I have at the end of my line? You're very correct. Semicolon. Now I'm going to debug my program. Okay, so I'll do my 4 divide. 24 by 6. There you go. That's your program. Okay, once again, if it didn't work, make sure you check your code against the code in the program. Make sure that you have your parentheses. Make sure pause is in all caps. Make sure that there's quotation marks around pause. Make sure you got a semicolon at the end. Okay, make sure that it's not outside this last closing bracket. Remember, if it's outside that last closing bracket, it won't run. All right? So now I'm going to go inside my calculator program to run the executable file. So I double click calculator, go inside the debug. So all you do is you right click your exe file and you click 7-zip, add to calculator zip. That's the file you send to Miss Hadley. You're all done.